Welcome to State of the State. My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Mike Stenhouse, the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, and sometimes host of this program. Welcome to State of the State.
Great to be back with you, Richard.
I want to mention to the audience from the outset that we had another guest scheduled. Spencer Dickinson, who was a candidate for the Democrat nomination in the 1st Congressional District, was scheduled as a guest, and he has declined to participate for some unspecified reason. We will attempt to do an 1-hour interview and hopefully cover all the topics we want to cover. So the sudden departure of David Cicilline as a representative from the Rhode Island 1st Congressional District resulted in a great political theater in the primary on September 5th. On the Democrat side, a scrum occurred in which a dozen candidates finally emerged. One of them, Don Carlson, withdrew after the ballots were printed. Carlson still managed to get 1.2% of the vote, which may be an indication of how much attention voters pay to what's going on. No Republican has held that seat in Congress since Ron Makeley beat long-term Democrat Fernand St. Germain, who was caught up in the House banking scandal. This year, 2 candidates stepped forward: 30-year Marine Corps veteran Colonel Gerry Leonard and Terry Flynn, who is a small business owner. A total of 42,155 votes were cast, which is a turnout of about 12.5% of the registered voters in the 1st Congressional District. 90.6% of the ballots were for Democrats. The 2 Republicans pulled in 9.4%. Mike, let's talk about the 2 Republicans first. Both candidates were new to the political scene, although Terry Flynn did served on the Middletown Town Council. Gerry Leonard, endorsed by the Republican Party, got 75.8% of the votes cast, and Flynn received less than 1,000. Now, Mr. Stenhouse, your organization, I believe, urged Republicans to cross over in the primary and vote for maybe 1 or 2 Democrats who you've identified as moderate. Can you tell us if that's accurate? Who were the Democrats identified, and is there a fact that so many Republicans crossed over that the turnout for Republican voters was so low?
Wow. First of all, a couple things aren't quite accurate in that. Let me start with the last question. We called it a crossover campaign, but I'll explain that in a second. Were we responsible for that turnout? I have no idea. I do know that we had some impact. Before I get to our campaign, our organization encouraged anyone who would have normally sat out the Democrat primary. That's a Republican or a Democrat or an independent who normally wouldn't vote in a Democrat primary. Anyone who, if you thought like we did, that Rhode Island needs a different kind of representation in Congress than what we had in recent years with David Cicilline and with Jim Langevin, and most recently, of course, with Seth Magazine, all of whom, very disappointed Langevin moved so far to the left in his last few terms, that Rhode Island needed someone who represented our values. And I didn't feel any of those, and I thought we needed a change. So if you agreed with us that we need a change of representation who reflects some of our core cultural values like we have in this state, so many of us, that we need a different kind of representative. And there were a few candidates who did that. So anybody who was going to sit out that campaign, that primary, Democrat primary, if you can make yourself eligible by disaffiliating, fine, or if you're already disaffiliated but would have stayed home, go vote in it, or if you're a Democrat that would have stayed home, go vote in it and vote for one of the moderate candidates. So our campaign was not just about crossover, not just about disaffiliation. In fact, that was a small piece, but I believe over 500 people did disaffiliate, but our messaging was to the larger audience, independents primarily. We don't recommend candidates. We can't do that as a 501c3 organization. Other groups rated candidates. We just said vote for one of the less progressive or more moderate candidates. That's up to you to decide who's who. So we never mentioned a name. of any candidate to support. So we were not backing anybody or anything like that. So that's kind of the setup on that.
That's important for people to understand, I think. You are a 501c3, which means that, as you said, you cannot endorse candidates. The organizations that do are 501c4s or super PACs or whatever. So that's an important factor. I did not realize you were a 501c3.
We were basically advising people of their rights. You have a right, even if, and we had a little saying, vote twice this year. Use the full power of vote once in the primary if you're eligible, and vote once in the general election. But vote, why just wait till the general election? Vote twice. Use your voice in the primary. Why not be, if you have a right to vote, why not be strategic about it? Even if Democrats aren't your thing, maybe vote for a moderate Democrat, because as you mentioned earlier, it's very, very likely the Democrat is going to win that race in November. So why not use the full power of your right to vote and be a little bit strategic about it? So we're just advising people to use the full power of their vote, but we did not advise them in any way who to vote for.
You know, it's even kind of ironic that one of the candidates, Alan Waters, was a Republican who ran against Cicilline and then changed horses and became a Democrat to seek to replace Cicilline. And I mean, he didn't fare very well in the voting, but that was kind of an interesting change of horses, if you will.
Yeah, there are some candidates. He ran, I think, as a Republican or an independent or Democrat when he lived in Massachusetts, and now he's kind of run as both a Republican and a Democrat here in Rhode Island. So there are some people kind of perpetual candidates. He was one of the names that many people talked about. Is he one of the moderate candidates? I said, well, that's up for you to decide. There are a couple others. The fact that the guest who declined to be here today was one of those candidates a lot of people talked about as well. So, but again, just to be clear, it was very controversial that we did that. We're not aligned officially with any party, of course. Our philosophy aligns more with Republicans than with Democrats. We're a conservative organization, so but we don't have any official tie to the Republican Party. But many Republicans were upset at us for trying to drive people out of the Republican Party. I said, look, I'm just advising people of their rights. If they believe like we do, maybe that's a good strategic move. That's up to them to decide. So I understand the controversy around it, but hey, we're not afraid of that.
This morning's Providence Journal gives Leonard, who they describe, believe it or not, as a John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan type Republican. John F. Kennedy, of course, was a Democrat, but they give him a very long shot at turning the district that voted for Biden by 30 points and Cicilline by 28 in the last election. Given the low turnout in the primary, do you think a Republican newcomer like Gerry Leonard can win this seat?
First of all, let me say, as you may know, I also have an interview show. You've been on my show a few times. And we invited all the candidates from both parties to come on. We ended up interviewing 4 candidates, 3 Democrats. Gerry Leonard, I think he likes
the way he
Gary,
pronounces it, yeah.
Gary declined to come on our show, but his opponent, who was defeated, Terry Flynn, did come on our show. So I'm a little bit aware of Terry's positions, and they were kind of milquetoast, if you would. So I don't know anything about Gerry, other than what I read in the paper today about him. Look, if you're in a plus 30 Democrat district like Gerry is running, you have to have a campaign position that is earth-shattering, news-breaking, will get you attention on its own if you're going to overcome a 30-point deficit to begin with, which the Democrats have. I haven't seen that yet from Leonard's campaign. I don't know if he's got something in the bag of cooking, but basically you're trying to defeat an incumbent. The Democrats are the incumbent, and like you said, they have been for decades. Mm-hmm. You're going to defeat an incumbent or an incumbent party. You got to have a major issue that's going to blow the doors off the media coverage, and I haven't seen it yet.
Like the House banking scandal, for example.
Something, exactly.
Brought Ron Makeley into.
We'll see if he brings it up or not. I don't know.
Well.
So no, as of now, especially given no name recognition previously, I don't see that he has much of a chance.
On the Democrat side, Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, who was actually plucked from the Providence City Council when Dan McKee thought he would be running against Providence Mayor Alorza for governor, was thought to be the front runner until it was revealed that one or more of her campaign workers had forged about 40% of the signatures on her certification papers. Then she kind of faded. She faded to fourth place with just over 3,000 votes. Aaron Regenberg, who came on this program and is becoming sort of a perennial candidate, moved into first place, but came in second with still about 9,500 votes. Interestingly enough, he was endorsed by Bernie Sanders and Jane Fonda, of all people, which certainly endeared him to the AOC. So I think the Jane Fonda, in a state that has a lot of veterans in it, that endorsement probably didn't go a long way to help him. Then we had three-term state senator Sandra Cano, who seemed to be gaining ground, and then she ended up in third place with just 5,290 votes. And then Representative Stephen Casey, who appeared on this program with Spencer Dickinson, came in fifth with 2,259 votes. The candidate I mentioned before, Don Carlson, withdrew amid whispers of some inappropriate conduct when he was on the adjunct faculty of a Massachusetts college. Still managed to garner 676 votes, while the gentleman he was on here with, Spencer Dickinson, came in dead last, believe it or not, with about 300 votes. But what is your overall impression of this, I called it a scrum or fiasco that took place? 12 Democrats suddenly emerging all for the same seat. Do you have any feeling of impression about it overall?
Well, I do now. You, in your opening comment, you called it theater. First, let me say the irony there. The theater, the real theater that happened, this is just good old-fashioned politics. I'll explain more in a second. But real theater was with David Cicilline when he was an impeachment manager. You talk about staged, fake stuff. We all know now that everything they presented was false, and David Cicilline should have been embarrassed out of that seat, should have resigned back then. I'm glad he resigned. He was not honest in that impeachment. That was theater. That was theater. This is just good old-fashioned politics. A lot of people in a race they shouldn't be in, a lot of speculation. But the reason I call this theater as well, because this is all, I realize now, this was all decided many, many months ago, despite all the media speculation. Gabe Amo, who won, worked for Gina Raimondo, worked for President Biden, worked for President Obama. They all supported him. I'm convinced they had the national Democrat get out the vote machine behind him. We didn't know it. He spent a lot of money at the end. I don't know if where the money came from, but there's a lot of volunteer and other activities that go on that aren't reported, that you don't see, that the media is not aware of, that you or I are not aware. The only way a guy with no name recognition previously, even though he spent some money at the end, could get that many votes, 33% of the vote in a 12-way race, is if there's some serious stuff going on behind the scenes. And it takes a political machine to gin up that many votes. And I'm not saying any of it was fraudulent or anything like that. Honest, legitimate vote.
Yeah, they got it out.
Yep, I'm convinced that the Democrat national machine and the local machine, and I'll tell you about that in a second too, if you want to hear an interesting theory there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was behind it. Now, that's the national machine, Biden, Raimondo, Obama. We've heard for years that McKee chose Matos as lieutenant governor to help with the Hispanic vote. And it helped him, and it probably helped him get elected. But after that, nobody in that party or in McKee's close staff wanted anything to do with her. She was not well liked. She was not well liked. He actually originally wanted her to win, so she'd be out of his administration. She is not well liked. The media loves her. But McKee and his people, I'm told, wanted her gone. But when President Biden, former Governor Raimondo, maybe Obama's team said, despite you want her to win and be out, you're back in Amo. You're turning your machine on to Amo, Gabe Amo. I think that's what happened here. That's the only way to explain what happened, because he had zero name recognition going to that. I'm a political. Have you ever heard of him before? 4 months ago, right?
No.
So, and you and I follow this stuff pretty closely, right?
Yep.
And imagine the voter. So that's my theory. I can't prove it, but that's my theory.
It's an interesting theory, and what occurs to me is that these other 11 people, including Sabina Matos, and elected people like Sandra Cano and Casey, who is a representative from Woonsocket, they're Democrats, and they walked into, it's almost a trap. They knew that that Gabe Amo was going to have this.
Well, nobody knew that. Nobody knew that. That was the thing.
Even other Democrat candidates?
I don't think so.
Wow.
That's what I mean. This was a really massive and somewhat, I don't know if they did it on purpose. So a lot that happens in politics. Not that there's anything illegal or fraudulent or illicit about it, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in campaigns under the radar, and I think a lot of stuff happened here.
Well, that's why they call it politics.
That's right. That's right.
One thing that strikes me, Mike, is that the resumes of many of these candidates seem, I'll use the term thin. In that sense, we've got people like Matos, Cano, Caseta, who ran. They're all city employees. They have jobs and staff jobs in the cities, Providence, Pawtucket, whatever. And Stephen Casey is a firefighter in Woonsocket. But Aaron Regenberg, he is a Brown University and Harvard Law graduate, and he lists his occupation as activist. I mean, what are these? I don't understand what they think they bring to the party. When I say the party, I don't mean the Democrat Party. What do they hope to accomplish with such a thin background?
Well, I speak for them, obviously, but look, I take a slightly different view. I applaud people for engaging in the democratic process, however much of a long shot they might be. It is, I won't mention any names, it is astounding to me how some people think they can win. I mean, not just throw their hat in the ring, but actually think they can win once they get into it without any money. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some candidates, I don't think they raise more than $50,000. This is a federal seat.
Yeah.
You should be raising 10 times that much minimum.
You need 50,000 right? to run for the state office.
So it's astounding that people go in actually thinking they can win. It's one thing if you're going in to try to raise your profile, maybe get a little name recognition for the next campaign you want to run, for the next office, whatever that might be. And that's a proven formula. Sometimes it takes you to run 2 or 3 times before you get elected for whatever that is. So some people might be with that. Stephen Casey, take him. There's a guy who had a legitimate reason to think he could win. Mm-hmm. He was a fireman. We know the firemen can turn out people on election day. Yep. They have a great get out the vote campaign. But again, it's a special election. Very few people vote. So you can't get the full impact of that firemen's get out the vote machine, and it certainly couldn't compete with a national, Biden, Obama, Raimondo machine, right? Or you add in McKee as well, probably. So again, I applaud them for running, and when they are running in this case, what will likely remain, although it's very speculative, but I think likely remain a Republican House of Representatives, and well, certainly for the rest of this term it will be, and then of course don't forget we got to do this all over again in a year.
In a year,
right? Yeah, when the regular election time comes, that's going to be interesting. Who's going to and then we're going to challenge Amo next year, or is he basically the king now, and he's sitting on his throne that no one's going to try to knock him off the top of the mountain? We'll see. But again, I'm glad people get engaged in the Democrat press. They're right. As foolish as thoughts of victory might be for some, I applaud them for engaging.
Yeah. Speaking of Gabe Amo, his ads all emphasized one thing. The Providence Journal called them gauzy photos of him with President Obama and President Biden. And he talks about he worked for them, and he acknowledges that he worked for Gina Raimondo's administration when she was governor. But have you heard anything? Does anybody have any idea what he did in these jobs? I haven't heard anything about specifically what he did.
No, his name was just another name to me of the 12 until election night returns started coming in. So the day after the election, I went to his website and really spent some time looking through it. So while he didn't, I don't think he explained there what he did for them. I think I remember one actually kind of compelling story. He said for soldiers or first responders who were killed, and he was the person who made the calls on behalf of the administration to see if they would talk to the president or whoever he was working for at the time. Look, Gabe Amo publicly with the photos you just talked about, interviews, very engaging, very kind seeming, seems to be, wants to portray himself as a moderate, very intelligent, well-spoken, presents well. But boy, when you look at his website, he's as far left as any of the other candidates. And he did a tremendous job. And again, this is politics, right? So this is not necessarily criticism. He did a tremendous job of deceiving voters about who he was.
About his moderate stance.
Yeah, he is not a moderate.
If you look at the website, he's far left.
I was astounded to read. Not just the positions, but some of the tropes he would use about MAGA Republicans peddling hate or whatever. It was just the same kind of things you'd hear from AOC or anyone else like that. I was really surprised because the little I did know about him, hey, this sounds like a moderate guy. He's not. He's certainly not the different kind of representative that I talked about, and I think many Rhode Islanders want. So he's going to be more of the same. In fact, he outright praised Cicilline for his positions, and basically said, "I'm going to be a clone. I want to continue his legacy and all that kind of stuff."
Cicilline was regarded as the fifth-ranking member of the Democrats in the House when he was managing. This kid's going to be a freshman in a House that's controlled by Republicans, and he's joining another freshman, Seth Magaziner, in the same scenario. So it's going to be a while before he can be another David Cicilline.
The woke progressives are in control of that House delegation. No question about that.
I'd like our audience to know that candidate Gabe Amo will appear on this program for an interview. We're firming up the details, but he will be on October 5th, and we'll look forward to learning more about his positions on these issues. I want to talk a little bit about what campaigns you talked about, in points that he brings out on his website. Campaigns by Democrats seem to be based on what I call 4 core values. Not sure you agree with all of them, but let's explore them.
All right.
The first is abortion. Now, a recent poll showed that this issue drives suburban soccer moms who want the option to terminate their daughter's pregnancy if they become pregnant, drives them into the arms of Democrats. In Rhode Island, the right to an abortion is guaranteed by law at any stage of the pregnancy. Yet Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos and Senator Sandra Cano both appeared with their daughters, never their sons, in their campaign ads, and really said they would be supporting a national right to an abortion law. Gerry Leonard, on the other hand, said he would not support such a law. But does this, am I overstating the importance of the abortion issue to Democrats? And does Gerry Leonard's stance that he would never support a national law, does that diminish his chances even further?
I have for years been confounded about how Republicans continue to allow themselves to get beat over the head with this issue. 2 things are simultaneously true. A large majority of Rhode Islanders believe that a woman should have some right to choose. I use the word some on purpose. And even roughly 65, 70%. An even larger majority, 74, 75, 76%, believe there should be restrictions on that right to choose. Yeah, it is, and they don't believe in taxpayer funding of abortion. and they don't believe that minor children should be allowed to have an abortion without their parents' consent. But yet Democrats believe in all three of those things. They against public opinion. They believe pretty much in abortions right up to the point of birth. Some Democrats you don't nationally even believe after birth. They believe taxpayers should fund it through Medicaid or insurance or even more directly, and many believe that any young girl with or without their parents' consent should be allowed to go have that gruesome medical procedure performed at almost any time. So if you think about it, I don't know what Gerry Leonard, now from a federal point of view, I believe the Supreme Court got it right. This is not a federal issue. This is a state's issue. I do not believe there should be any federal legislation, pro-choice or pro-life, on it. And if I'm running for Congress, I wouldn't support any law having to do with abortion. Leave it up to the states. Now, I don't know where Gerry Leonard goes, but it is astounding to me that no Republican candidate, we didn't see Ashley Kalus do it, we didn't see Alan Fung do it, I don't know if we'll see Gerry Leonard do it, try to paint the Democrats as the ones who are extreme on this issue. You can say, look, I agree with most Rhode Islanders. Women should have some choice, but with restrictions. That's the populist view. It's the Democrats. Gabe Amo, who is extreme on this position by wanting all those other things I've just talked about, but yet Republicans just sit back and make it in either I'm pro-life or I'm pro-choice, either I'm pro-women or I'm not, and that's not the way it is. But yet nobody seems to understand this issue well enough.
Observers like you and I kind of are in the same situation. We don't understand why the candidates like Alan Fung particularly, why they let themselves get beat up about this issue. I just don't understand.
It's an issue you should be able to, I mean, Mike Pence flipped this issue in the vice presidential debate in 2016 with, who was it? The governor of, what was it, from the Virginia, what was his name? Yeah. But he flipped it. Well, go pull up the 2016 vice presidential debate and watch how Pence flipped that issue.
Yeah, when he was debating Kamala?
No, the first year, the first time Trump ran.
Okay.
It was Hillary's vice president, Tim Kaine.
Okay.
Tim Kaine.
Boy, how
yeah, I know.
Better memory than me.
Yeah, okay.
That's how important vice presidents are, right? Yeah, okay. I think,
2016, yeah.
Yeah. This is certainly a topic that I don't quite understand. But the other one that's perennial is protecting Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
Protect it from what? The actuaries at the Social Security Trust Fund have warned they will be able to pay full benefits only through 2034. The Medicare Trust Fund reported it could run low by 2028, in 5 years. The Republican Study Committee proposed raising the retirement age from 67 to 69 after 2033, and then reducing benefits for what they call higher salary recipients. In other words, there's an executive who's earning $50 million a year need to receive the same benefits as someone making $50,000 a year. So as soon as that comes up, it seems that this is an issue that the Democrats pounce on, and they have pictures of the famous picture of Granny being pushed over the cliff in a wheelchair. Is Social Security, they call it the third rail of politics, and are Republicans shooting themselves again in the foot by not directly responding? I mean, this is one thing. Seth Magaziner came out. Alan Fung at a fundraiser or some luncheon or something came out with the perfect answer. He pointed to his mother and he said, my mother's collecting Social Security. Why would I be against it? But yet his campaign ads were silent.
2 points. Democrats and Seth Magaziner flat out lied on the issue. The things they accuse Republicans of wanting to do. Just because one Republican somewhere in the country proposed something that might lead to reforms doesn't mean that Alan Fung or Ashley Kalus or or Gerry Leonard or any other Republican is for it. So they unabashedly, unapologetically, flat out lie about it, but the media pushes it. But the Republicans do shoot themselves in the foot. That study commission, as right as it is, it was political suicide. The only way to reform Social Security and Medicare is in a bipartisan way, so that one side can't be beat over the head with it by the other side. It's that important an issue. There are so many senior voters out there right now, or future senior voters, that you have to do it. It has to be done. Social Security and Medicare are in dire, terrible financial straits. There's no question about that. But unless you put a bipartisan commission together and agree, we're going to implement but in politics, you'd prefer to see the country go bankrupt than you would to take away a political cudgel against your opponent. And so a bipartisan commission may be a pipe dream, may be impossible to do, but that's the only way to attack it. Otherwise, Republicans, that was a stupid thing to put out. As right as it was, political suicide.
The Republican study group, which I want the audience to understand, is I call it a quasi-official part of the Republican Party. It's not a commission or committee that comes from Congress.
Right.
But they have also proposed, with respect to Medicare, that they should turn Medicare into what they're calling a premium support system, where seniors would receive a subsidy to purchase private health plans. Does this also play right into Democrats' hands? In other words, do Republicans make things so complicated that Democrats jump on it and the average voter is like, what are they talking about?
Well, again, it's the same thing. Again, Republicans are absolutely right. That would be my preferred way to do Medicare. But of course, again, it's political suicide, because all Democrats, hey, you want to take Medicare away. Boom. Well, yeah, they do, but they want to replace it with something better. But they've got their political cudgel right there. Hey, Republicans want to take Medicare away. That's all they got to say. And you're right, it's simple. It's not the Republicans trying to make it complicated. You have to reform. Reform is always complicated. And both these programs need reform. But the Democrats would rather have the political issue.
When you mentioned bipartisan committees and so forth, I'm reminded that, and you probably remember, that there was a bipartisan commission that recommended or came out and said right out that mail-in ballot systems were ripe for fraud. Do you know what I'm talking about? And
that was Jimmy Carter. Yeah, Jimmy Carter led that commission.
Yep, and it was I forget who was named for it, but they were two well-respected, one on the Democrat side, one on the Republican side, who led that joint effort, and they came out with all kinds of recommendations which went nowhere.
Yeah. Well, these would have to go somewhere, because like you said, there's a financial cliff. Unlike election reform, nothing really going to happen that's noticeable. But with Social Security and with Medicare, if they go bankrupt, yeah, and we're off the cliff, and everybody's going to notice it. So, I mean, everybody can see that we're approaching that cliff. But I don't see how the politics allow us to stop from going over it.
The third core value is gun control, and I know we're probably not quite on the same page on this Second Amendment issue. You and I talked about it on your program, The Dugout. And Democrats are, like most of us, are opposed to what they call gun violence. Yet they never seem to be specific about how they would eliminate this threat, except to come up with vague terms like banning assault weapons. And yet none of them seem to be able to define what an assault weapon is, so they turn to focus group approved terms such as military-style weapons or weapons of war. And I don't know where former Marine Gerry Leonard comes down on this issue, but are Republicans who support the Second Amendment on the losing end of this argument, in your view?
I don't think so. Again, I think most Americans believe in the right to self-defense. I think the assault weapons ban is a phrase. Again, the left is very good at using words that resonate with voters. Gabe Amo supports, I'm reading from his website, to continue to fight to finally ban assault weapons in our country. I don't know where Gerry Leonard stands on this. This next one really concerned me from Amo's website, which is I only say it because it's a theme that you're seeing playing out in New Mexico right now. Increased funding for research at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, for gun violence prevention. The governor of New Mexico just declared gun violence a health emergency. Mm-hmm. This is where they're going with this issue. It's probably the next issue, where they're going with climate change is probably the next issue you're going to bring up. And you're going to start seeing the executives start taking emergency executive action, just like we saw during COVID, and start trampling on people's rights. And we also saw that no court in the country, locally, state, federal, is gonna go against a governor who declared a health emergency. Why you would have the CDC look into gun issues or gun-related death issues is a clear indication where the left wants to go with this issue. So again, I'm not trying to make this about ammo. I'm Gabe Amo, interesting name when it comes to gun violence, isn't it? Gun issues. Ammunition. But this is where the left is going. They're trying to curtail your Second Amendment rights. This is an amendment to the Constitution, the second one. This is not just some law we can debate. This is an amendment, Second Amendment to the Constitution. And they're going to try to infringe on, usurp that right by declaring health emergency somehow. It's coming. It already came in New Mexico.
Yeah, we talk about the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. I actually wrote to our congressional delegation when Jim Langevin and David Cicilline were in the House of Representatives, and I urged them, because they all came out with this assault weapons ban, which was tried for 10 years. And the FBI came out and said there's no correlation between the availability of these things and gun violence. But anyway, I asked them, I said, look, you can form a joint resolution now and start the process of declaring, overturning the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
But there was no answer, because for the very simple reason is it would never happen because it wouldn't get over the hurdles necessary to amend.
But that's the only way you can take that right away is through a constitutional amendment. Right. And all these other laws will continue to be. I mean, as long as we have reasonable judges, as long as we have constitutionalists on the U.S. Supreme Court, they're not going to get anywhere. By the way, the only thing you and I really disagree with is I think a properly constructed red flag law makes sense to me, because I believe mentally ill people should not be allowed to own firearms or purchase them or something. But we do not have a properly constructed red flag law in this state.
I want to talk about climate change. You referred to that, and certainly that is what I call the fourth leg of their table. Talk show host and author Glenn Beck wrote in his 2022 book, which you may have read, it's called The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism. This is what he says, Chapter 3. Climate change will be the catalyst for the New World Order. And he outlines 4 steps that these climate doomsayers should take to realize their end game. First, establish a flexible timeline, not imminent but not too far into the future. And second, propose potential solutions to the disasters that are predicted. Next, create a consensus of some real scientists who support some part of your legislation or your corrections, and then claim that they support all of them. And finally, constantly change and shift your predictions. Do you believe, Mr. Stenhouse, that we face an immediate disaster for climate change? President Biden, in his press conference from Hanoi, said that he was not worried, or we shouldn't be worried about a threat from China, that climate change is the greatest risk we have. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or is it being overstated for whatever reason?
I personally and our organization are changing our views on this. Since our inception in 2011, wow, 12 years, we have argued, whatever you believe about climate change, the economic prescriptions, the restrictions, the taxes on fossil fuels, the limitative choices, the forced subsidization and production of green energy sources that aren't market friendly or market ready yet, that those, if you look at a cost benefit ratio, the cost to the economy, the cost to families, the cost to business, the cost here, freedom to choose, that none of those costs equal the potential minuscule benefits to reducing carbon emissions. That's been our position for the last 12 years. We're going to, I think, start, although I don't have enough resources to do all the research myself, but I know it's out there. I think this whole climate thing is a myth now, and I'm going to say it for the first time. Some of you are going to think, hey, you went off the deep.
Oh, you're a denier.
Yeah, I am a climate denier.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, notice how they changed it. Notice how they changed the language. First, it was global warming.
You know, it's global cooling.
Well,
Before
global
that.
cooling before that, but now it's climate. Of course, the climate changes. We see it all the time. It's changed throughout my lifetime many times, and it's going to continue to change, and it has for millions of years. But when you think that this Earth is hundreds of millions of years old,
4.3 billion.
okay, all right, and that it's going to somehow come to an end because of what you and I and our brothers and sisters across the globe are doing, it's ridiculous on its face, and we're going to start trying to point that out. This is nothing more than, what convinced me of this was COVID. All the false narratives, all the government propaganda, beautifully coordinated, lockstep and barrel, the media supporting it, not questioning it. When I saw that they could put, because we had the experts, we had Dr. Andrew Bostom on, we had other doctors, nurses, and scientists on talking about masking, lockdowns, vaccines, not effective, harmful, in the same way that the climate change solutions, as you talk about, are harmful and they don't create any benefit. When I saw they could pull off those hoaxes with those vaccines and those masking policies, I said, you know what? I now believe they've been pulling off this climate change, global warming hoax for decades. I believe it's a hoax, just like Russia, just like tax the rich hoax. There's so many hoaxes out there that the media is supposed to be the guardians of truth. You and I are sort of part of the media. There's not too many of our brothers and sisters out there who are guardians of the truth.
Yeah, the media today wants to follow the narrative
That's
that the editors or the owners decree. Well, you anticipated my next topic, which is pandemic paranoia, I call it.
Yeah.
The Democrats in Washington, bureaucracy, are warning of a new coronavirus epidemic and advising that we all get the new so-called vaccine. And I say so-called vaccine because what we've been getting is not a vaccine like, say, the polio vaccine or the smallpox vaccination. At best, those shots provided temporary protection against a severe reaction to the man-made engineered virus that came out of a lab in China. This man-made engineered virus mutates very rapidly. Recently, the CDC new chief, Dr. Mandy Cohen, predicts, quote, there will be a lot of virus this winter. There's a respiratory syncytial, I hope I pronounced that right, virus, or RSV, that has made an appearance along with a new strain of COVID-19. It is not clear. The CDC says these updated shots that they're now promoting have a single target strain of the coronavirus that is fading away already and being replaced by viruses that are milder. There's speculation I've begun to hear that the Democrats are now setting the stage for a second Biden campaign that features, once again, him emerging from the Oval Office or his basement wearing a mask and only coming out from time to time and certainly not debating. And also using this mechanism to enforce more controls over our economies and our personal lives. And I'm not, am I overstating things, or are you coming around to this view as well?
Well, I share those concerns. It's hard for me to believe that they'll go down that path again, because I don't believe that dog's going to hunt no more. There will be civil disobedience, not violence, civil disobedience if they try to impose those kinds of mandates. I can assure you that. Most people, anybody who has studied this, looked at the act, because behind all their mandates, there are no studies, there is no conventional wisdom, there is no record over the centuries or even recent decades of success with any of those prescriptions, lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccines. Especially when you say that natural immunity isn't a real thing either, like they did. I mean, it's...
Well, that's one of the things they're saying is a mitigating factor. Now, all of a sudden, natural immunity is a mitigating factor.
So I know it worked for them in 2020 and maybe 2022 a little bit, but it's not going to work for them this year if they go down that. It will be their political suicide. It's not too often Democrats make such major mistakes because they have the media to support them. But I think this time that would backfire on them. What they did by declaring those the Rhode Island Department of Health without any scientific basis at all, there are lawsuits that they are petrified will go to discovery or go to trial where it will show that the prince had no clothing. Will it show they had neither they nor the CDC, because they say, oh, we're just following CDC guidelines. Neither the CDC, neither the Rhode Island Department of Health, nobody had any legitimate research, study, history, or current data that showed that any of these extreme measures had any record of success or any likelihood of succeeding. It was all just to control the populace, and the media backed them. The courts refused to hear challenges to them. So many people, Mike, where do we turn? I mean, who do you go to? The media won't put the truth out. The courts won't allow cases to be heard. Lawmakers are so hook, line, and sinker on the narrative. Where do you go? What do you do? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know if they try it again, you'll hear from the people of this state and this country, I'm quite certain.
Let's talk about President Biden. I just referred to his emerging from the basement with a mask and so forth, but of more concern to many Americans is the apparent cognitive decline that the man is experiencing. And most recently at his press conference this past weekend in Hanoi, his staff literally had to shut off his microphone and end the conference because it was getting painfully obvious that he was not being responsive to the questions that were posed. Yet he is still regarded as, quote, the front runner of their campaign. But I notice, and perhaps you have as well, that some, let's call them Democrat pundits like Axelrod and Carville are starting to come around now and start to question it because they see the polls that show the vast majority of Americans, and about 62% at least, depending on what poll you look at, of Democrats do not think that Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is competent and capable enough to hold that office. I guess my question is, do you think he's still going to run again? Do you think the Democrats are going to finally exercise some control? You talk about their machine and so forth, and get down to the point where they say to him, this isn't working?
It's very sad to see any person in that state of mental health decline. It's tragic to think that somebody like that is leading our nation in the free world. It's a tragedy. Whether you agree with his politics, and it's not just about age, it's his capacity. There are many 80-year-olds who are mentally capable, 90-year-olds even. Look at you, you're 95, right?
Not quite, but I am an 80-something.
So I have been saying for a year on my show that not just his health, but with these emerging information, verified information about the financial kickbacks he and his son have been receiving, even if not directly from these foreign nations, that as that scandal grows, combined with his lack of performance on inflation and everything, immigration, and combined with his obvious deteriorating mental, that he will not be the Democrat Party's nominee, one way or the other. I do not believe it can happen.
People have expressed to pollsters serious doubts about the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Do you see that she would be a viable candidate if President Biden announces that he's not going to run again?
Well, she'll be as viable or not viable as any other Democratic candidate. There isn't a clear alternative. All right, they have a very weak bench. Somebody will have to emerge.
Well, Gavin Newsom is the name that keeps popping up.
But he's got his obvious problems as well with his far, far left positions, especially with what he's doing with parental rights when it comes to transgender kids. I mean, it's horrible what he's doing out there in California. So he's got his problems as well. Yeah, he's the biggest name out there. But, you know, governors of, you know, look at Clinton, look at Jimmy Carter. These are governors that came out of nowhere and won. So, but she'd be in the mix. Newsom will be in the mix. Other people will be in the mix. I don't know who, but I don't have a horse to put any money on right now. But it's not going to be Biden, in my view.
I'll throw an interesting name out. I've heard this from several people.
Gina Raimondo.
I keep smiling. I said, it's chances of a person from a state that has 4 votes in the Electoral College, although she is clearly a prolific fundraiser, especially among the Silicon Valley and the Wall Street elite money people. That would make her, to me, a viable vice presidential candidate. But
As viable as anyone else?
for president?
Well, when I say as viable as anyone else, I think that means very unviable. Oh. But there's no one else who's going to compete against you. If you got 4 lousy horses, one of them's got to win,
Yeah.
right, in a race.
My dream ticket is Fetterman Feinstein. we'll let that go.
I call them fossil fools.
Yeah. Well, and the incredible thing
Mitch
is
McConnell
that,
included.
yeah, that's another unfortunate,
Yes.
very unfortunate situation.
They need to be out of there.
And Nancy Pelosi
Yep,
saying, I'm going to run again,
Yep.
and pointing towards San Francisco as a model where businesses are closing. I almost think that some of these people live in an alternative universe because they go to their gated communities with fences and they...
I've coined the phrase, the liberal Never Land of make-believe, with the picture of Peter Pan flying over Never Land. Yeah, they live in the Never Land of make-believe. They do. I do. They think I live in that land, so it goes both ways.
Let's talk about, I want to talk about the crisis at the border. Today, of course, we're taping this on September 11th, 22 years after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and God knows where the third airplane was really headed when it crashed in the field in Pennsylvania. But I look at this and I say, this is a kind of a disaster that is often used as a springboard by people with other motives. Specifically, I'm thinking that we saw the introduction of the Department of Homeland Security came out of that tragedy, and also the idea that we have to surrender some of our rights under the so-called Patriot Act in order to get at these people, and yet those provisions are being violated. Secretary Mayorkas of the Homeland Security Department keeps insisting that the border is secure, and we know that at least 7 million people have come across the border, and they're not just all walking through Mexico. They're coming from all over the world, and they don't walk over from Somalia, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, walk from Venezuela. All these people walk up to the border, and they seem to be fairly well fed, hydrated, clothes aren't tattered. They've walked thousands of miles through the mountains and jungles and across the deserts.
And many of them are terrorists.
And the ones they have identified, some as on the terror watch list, and there are getaways that we don't even know who the heck they are. But yet, we don't seem to be grasping the situation. I have not found a single person that has been able to tell me how many immigrants
Nobody knows.
are in Rhode Island.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's the biggest kept secret in this state. In Massachusetts, they've declared an emergency over it. Nobody will talk about it in this state, Republicans or Democrats. Nobody will talk about it. But they're here. They're destroying our schools, just like Mayor Adams in New York said, just like he said this immigration crisis will destroy New York City. It could destroy our country. Literally, if we're letting terrorists in. Who knows what kind of cells are there. But we know for one thing, let's take it back to the children. We know that the massive influx, and no school department will tell you how many kids are there who English is a second language or non-speaking, whatever, however you term it. But they're dragging down the rest of our educational population when it comes to achievement. How fast can you go if you've got a handful of students in your class can't speak English? How fast can you go for a kid who's fairly smart? You can't. And I've talked to some left-wing liberal activists who, off the record, tell me it's already destroying schools in Rhode Island. Never mind the cost of taxpayers for housing and SNAP, food cards and childcare and whatever else they're doing, and the cost of education. But it is destroying slowly. It's not the people, it's the immigration problem. I'm not calling the people cancers, but the immigration problem is a cancer to our society. There's no question. It's underreported, and it's like another third rail, like socialists. Nobody will talk about it, except for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think we're being told constantly that we're a nation of immigrants. And yet the immigrants that came here, especially in the 1800s and 1900s, were motivated differently than the people that seem to be arriving today. And I think
And they took a different legal path to get here, too.
Right. And those people who are coming in illegally today are motivated differently, and certainly they're not doing a lot for the economy, and that, believe it or not, we're almost out of time, and we've covered a lot of ground. And I really want to thank you, Mike, for putting up with my questions for an hour. I want to thank the audience for watching this edition. And as I said at the outset, we did have former candidate Spencer Dickinson, who was supposed to be here to represent the Democrat side of things, but I think our conversation was fairly well balanced and tried to address both sides of the issue.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching State of the State.